I never thought that at 61 years old I would sit across from the two people I trusted most in this world and watch them try to hand me my own ruin. But that is exactly what happened. And I was ready for every second of it. It started on a Thursday morning in late October. I was supposed to be at my quarterly appointment with Dr. Ellison. 27 years of marriage to Gerald had made me predictable. He liked knowing my schedule, my routines, where I was and when I would be back. I thought that was love. I was wrong about a great many things. The appointment was cancelled that morning. A family matter with the doctor's office. I didn't call Gerald to let him know I was coming home early. Why would I? It was my house too. I pulled into the driveway on Clover Lane at 10:40 in the morning. White siding, black shutters, the elm tree that my daughter Claire and I had planted when she was 9 years old. Everything looked exactly the way it always had. I used my key quietly. The living room was empty. But I could hear voices coming from upstairs. Gerald's voice. And another voice I recognized immediately. Marcus. My daughter's fiancé. The man she was supposed to marry in 7 months. I stood at the bottom of the stairs with my hand on the railing and I listened. Are you sure she won't be back early? That was Marcus. Hushed, but clear. She's on a fixed schedule. Doctor's appointment, then that little cafe on Birch Avenue. We have at least 2 hours. Gerald's voice carried a lightness I had not heard in years. 2 hours. For what? I climbed the stairs slowly. I knew which steps creaked. 30 years of living in that house had taught me. What about Claire? Marcus asked. She still thinks the wedding is happening in May. She does. Gerald almost laughed. She has no idea. She's so trusting. Just like her mother used to be. I pressed myself against the wall outside our bedroom door. Once the settlement is signed, we'll have everything. The house, the accounts, everything she built. Gerald's voice was calm. Deliberate. And Claire's inheritance? Marcus asked. By the time we're finished, there won't be anything left to inherit. She'll be lucky to get a card on her birthday. I stood in my own hallway listening to my husband of 27 years and my daughter's fiancé plan the removal of everything I had ever worked for. And underneath the nausea and the rage, something else arrived. Something quiet and cold and entirely focused. I did not go in. I went back downstairs, slipped out through the kitchen door, sat in my car 3 houses down, and made a decision. I would not confront them. I would not change my face or my routine or give them any reason to alter their strategy. I would let them believe they were winning. And I would spend the next 7 days making sure that when the moment came, they had nowhere to go. That evening I came home as if nothing had happened. Gerald was in the kitchen, relaxed, asking about my appointment. I told him it went fine. He nodded and poured himself a drink and I watched his face and understood that I was looking at a stranger wearing a familiar mask. The next morning I went through his study while he was in the shower. I found the hotel receipts tucked inside a folder labeled car insurance. 7 months of Thursday afternoons. Always the same hotel on the edge of town. Always cash. I photographed every one. In the drawer beneath his work files I found printed emails from an address I had never seen. The username was GMC_private. Gerald Marcus, I assumed. The messages went back almost a year. The lawyer says the language is airtight. She'll sign without understanding what she's giving up. Men and women his age get overwhelmed by the paperwork. They just want it over. Make sure the maintenance clause is buried deep in Section 4. Once the assessment triggers it, the house reverts automatically. I stood there in his study reading emails that mapped out the architecture of my own financial destruction and I photographed every page. That afternoon I called Sandra Voss. She had been my attorney for 12 years, handling business contracts and real estate. She was sharp and unsentimental and she owed me nothing. I told her I needed an emergency meeting. She made room for me at 8 the next morning. I spent that evening sitting at the kitchen table with Gerald, eating the dinner he had cooked, listening to him ask about Claire's wedding plans, watching him perform the role of a decent man with practiced ease. I gave him nothing to read in my face. Not that night, not in the days that followed. On Saturday I recorded them. I told Gerald I was going to the garden center for mulch. Instead I parked around the corner, came back through the side gate, and positioned myself beneath the bedroom window with my phone running. They arrived within 20 minutes of each other. "Did you bring the revised documents?" Gerald asked. "Right here." Marcus sounded pleased. By the time she realizes what she agreed to, the contestation window will have closed. The maintenance clause triggers within the first assessment cycle. She'll lose the house inside 90 days. And the investment accounts? Frozen in litigation. Our attorney estimates it'll cost her $40,000 just to fight for what's rightfully hers. And she doesn't have $40,000 liquid. I stood in my own garden and listened to them price out the cost of ruining me. "There's something else," Marcus said. His tone shifted. "Claire has been asking questions. About why I spend time here when you're alone. She's not stupid. She notices what she wants to notice," Gerald said. "She's so invested in this engagement working that she'll rationalize anything. We have one more week. After the papers are signed, what she suspects won't matter. She'll be too occupied with her father's collapse to focus on us." I left before they finished. I walked back to my car and uploaded everything to a secured cloud account I had set up 3 days earlier. Then I drove to the garden center and bought the mulch. The week passed the way a held breath passes. Long and pressurized and quiet on the surface. I met with Sandra twice. I brought her the receipts, the photographs of the emails, the recordings, and a copy of the settlement papers Gerald had given me to review. She read through the documents with the expression of someone examining a crime scene. "The maintenance clause," she said, pointing to Section 4. "If this triggers, you lose the property within the quarter. The language is deliberately obscure." "I know," I said. "The joint accounts are structured so that any legal challenge freezes them immediately. That benefits them, not you." She set the papers down. "Someone spent a long time designing this. I know that too." She looked at me. "What do you want to do?" "I want to let them present it," I said. "At the meeting. I want them to feel confident. And then I want to respond." Sandra smiled for the first time since I had walked in. "That we can arrange." The settlement meeting was scheduled for the following Friday at 9 in the morning. The office of Gerald's attorney, a man named Philip Crane, who had handled Gerald's business affairs for years and who was, I had recently confirmed, a close personal friend of his. Another layer of the same plan. I dressed carefully that morning. A charcoal blazer, the pearl earrings Claire had given me for my birthday, sensible heels. I looked like a woman coming to terms with the end of her marriage. That was the point. Sandra met me in the lobby. Gerald was already seated when we entered the conference room. He looked composed, prepared, vaguely sympathetic in the way of someone who has rehearsed sympathy. Marcus was not present. He had not been invited. That was deliberate too. His name on any document would have complicated things. Philip Crane sat at the head of the table with a leather portfolio and the careful manner of a man who believed he was the most prepared person in the room. "Before we begin," Crane said, "I want to acknowledge that these proceedings are difficult for everyone involved." Sandra smiled politely. "Of course." He opened the portfolio and slid a document across the table toward me. The settlement agreement. 41 pages. Designed to overwhelm. "We've tried to make this as fair and straightforward as possible," Crane said. I did not reach for the document. "Actually," I said, "before we look at that, I'd like to share something. I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. Gerald's voice came through the speaker first. Confident and unhurried. By the time she realizes what she signed, it'll be too late to contest any of it. Then Marcus. The maintenance clause triggers automatically. She'll lose the house inside 90 days. Then Gerald again. After the papers are signed, what she suspects won't matter. She'll be too occupied with her husband's collapse to focus on us. The room did not move. Gerald's face went through several things in a very short time. Confusion first. Then recognition. Then something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it. Crane's hand had stopped moving over his notepad. Sandra spoke then, quietly, without theatrics. We also have 7 months of hotel receipts, printed correspondence from a private email account coordinating the settlement strategy, and documentation of approximately $12,000 in marital funds withdrawn to support an undisclosed personal relationship. She paused. We're prepared to file today if that becomes necessary. The silence in that room was one of the most satisfying things I have ever experienced. Gerald did not faint. He sat very still and looked at the phone on the table as if it were an animal that had appeared without warning. Crane cleared his throat. He looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at his hands. What is it that you're proposing? Crane finally asked Sandra. She opened her own portfolio. A clean division of all joint assets at current market value. Full title of the primary residence transferred to my client. The retirement accounts remain intact and undivided. An assigned acknowledgement that no further legal claims will be pursued by either party. She slid the document across the table. It was 7 pages. Clear language, no buried clauses, no manufactured triggers. I'd recommend reviewing it carefully, Sandra said. We have time. It took Gerald's attorney 40 minutes to read it. Gerald sat across from me without speaking. I did not look at him. I looked at the window, at the November sky outside, at the ordinary Tuesday morning continuing without any awareness of what was being resolved in that room. Gerald signed. He did not make a scene. He did not protest. He picked up the pen and signed his name and slid the document back across the table, and that was the end of 27 years. I told Claire that evening. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten dinner with her father a dozen times in the past week while carrying everything I knew. She cried. Not because the marriage was ending, I think she had sensed for a long time that something was wrong, but because of Marcus. Because the man she had been planning a life with had been in that bedroom, in those emails, in that room with her father. She asked me how I had stayed so calm through all of it. I told her the truth. I was not calm. I was focused. There is a difference. She moved back home for a few months while she found her footing. We planted tulip bulbs in the back garden that fall, side by side in the cold dirt, talking about small things and letting the larger ones settle. Gerald moved out within the week. I heard through a mutual friend that Marcus had ended things with him several months later. I cannot say I was surprised. Men who treat loyalty as a strategy tend to run that strategy more than once. I kept the house. I kept the accounts. I kept my daughter. What they had tried to take from me was not just money or property. It was the story I would tell myself about my own life. The evidence that my choices had mattered, that the years had added up to something real. They failed at that. Completely. The elm tree Claire and I planted is still in the backyard. It loses its leaves every October and comes back every spring without being asked. I find that I think about it often. About how much quietly survives, if you give it enough time and enough room and enough refusal to be destroyed.